Turn your switch on.
Now is it on? Everybody's nodding. Everything's good. All righty. Very good. Well, I greet you on behalf of Sovereign Grace Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, which most of you know is basically South Georgia. And you know how that works. We're so close to Georgia that basically what that means is there's a lot more really big trucks in Jacksonville than there may be a little further south in Florida. But I greet you from there. The elders there are glad we've been able to pray with and encourage your congregation. It's nice to put faces with the names and with the church so that we can be better able to pray for you in the future. And we want to make sure we do that, and we thank you for your prayers as we go forward. But most of you are listening to me and you're thinking, wait a minute, Jacksonville, Florida, that doesn't sound quite right. So I was actually raised, my wife and I were raised in North Carolina, right? Woo-hoo! Yes, North Carolina. And that's why I think most of you talk funny. Or you think I talk funny. I don't know how that works. But yes, that was where I was raised and then moved down to Jacksonville 25 years ago and planted Sovereign Grace Baptist Church. And the Lord has blessed our efforts there, and it's been a blessing for us to serve there. And so let's turn our hearts now to our text. If you would, go ahead and open with me to Nehemiah 5 and 6 is where we're going to be looking. And we will be considering that text together. So look with me, if you will, at Nehemiah 5 and 6. As you turn there, let me pray for us, and then we will look together, gather our thoughts around this text. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. Faithful Father, you have been faithful to bring each and every one here this morning in the sound of my voice. This is your mercy. It's not by accident. You want your people to hear this word this morning. Would you come and visit with us by your Spirit? You have never turned away from us. You've never turned your head, even though we have been so quick to wander. Your steadfast love endures forever. Faithful Savior, when you were here on earth, you never wandered into unrighteousness, but that you were perfectly righteous, sinless in every way. You never flinched from the fears of what would happen to you when you went to Gethsemane. But you took every step knowing that it would require a cost. And you went without any delay, knowing that you must finish the task that God has given to you. Faithful Spirit, you have called in your grace so many of us this morning. You are sanctifying us in ways that befuddle our minds. We don't understand what you're doing. But you have promised that in your faithfulness, dear Spirit, that you will bring us to glory. You will bring us all the way home. And for this we're thankful, because sometimes it doesn't seem that way. So we confess our frailty and even our wandering hearts this morning. We're thankful that you can turn us and give us attention. You can grip our hearts. You can alleviate the distraction and even the discouragement, that we might be able to confess this morning together that you are faithful. And for this, we're thankful. Go with us now. Allow us to hear and receive your word by your Spirit. It's in Christ's name. Amen. Many of you have planned vacations, I'm sure. And as you begin planning the vacation, whether it's you actually having to do it or you're in a group that's doing it, the place a lot of times really matters, doesn't it? You want to make sure you get the right place. Some people, I'm from North Carolina, and here in Florida, everybody thinks that everything in North Carolina is mountains, and that's because nobody in Florida goes to the beach in North Carolina. But there are actually beaches in North Carolina, but nobody in Florida goes to those. Some people prefer the beach, and you have that as a respite, a place where you can go and get some relaxation, and you go to the beach. Others say, absolutely not. I need to go to the mountains. I need to be where there's beautiful mountains and scenery. Some of you would say, I don't want to be so close. I want to go big. And so you may want to go to London or Sydney. Who wouldn't? Those are great places, right? Go and vacation and see all these different places. Others of us would love a cabin as far out in the middle of nowhere as possible, alleviated from those dreaded notifications, and being able to rest and have some R&R there. More important than the place, though, are the people that we bring with us, isn't it? The opportunity to be able to bring maybe our family. I have a wife and kids that I would love to have with us as we go on vacations. Maybe a few friends, but I wouldn't want a crowd. I don't like a lot of people, but just a handful of people that are dear to me and to be able to go on that vacation. As we're planning, we put those things together, and we want to be able to have that vacation, and we have all this ideal understanding of where we're going to go and what we're going to do and the time we're going to spend. Now, I'm not one that likes to do a lot, so I'm the one that likes to play board games and to sit around in the house and enjoy time. And I really enjoy the time when we're all sitting in the room, not staring at our phones, and we don't have to talk. We can just be together. I enjoy those times. Wonderful opportunity to enjoy that. But we all know, and we've all gone on vacations, that before you get to the place, the car messes up. And you end up in the shop about halfway to wherever you're going. And that's a little irritating. And you never want to sit in McDonald's for 6 hours waiting for your car to be fixed. That's just not fun. Nobody enjoys that. But nonetheless, you get the car fixed and you get everything going and you're heading in the right direction and you get to the place. And man, the pictures of that Airbnb online were just so much more fantastic than what I'm seeing right now as I'm looking at this Airbnb that we thought we were going to just have a fantastic time with, right? And you get in there and like, man, they must have taken these pictures like years ago, because this place has a little to be wanted here. It's less than what we were anticipating. Along with those external things that are coming at us and we're having to deal with as a family, you and I also know that very family that I love so dearly, my wife and my kids and maybe some of those friends, the same frustrations and problems and struggles and irritations that we have in like normal life, they don't leave those back at home. They bring them with them. And now we're dealing with all of that stuff in a house that's less than perfect. And it's like an instant pot. It's just pressing us and making us just much more fantastic toward one another than we would like for it to be, right? And we're living there wondering, what in the world have we done to ourselves? Why are we doing this? So by the time the week has happened, then we get back home, and you know what we've done? We've had a vacation. And that's about the extent of what we can say about it. We have gone. We have participated during the week, and we have arrived back home. We have had a vacation. But with all of the internal strife of the people that came with us and all of the external circumstances that weren't exactly what we thought they were going to be, something very different took place than what we had anticipated as we were going. As we parachute into chapters 5 and 6 of Nehemiah, what we're going to find this morning is that you'll notice that a very similar thing is taking place among God's people as they don't anticipate or plan for something as minor as a vacation. They're actually working on a wall, a much more significant task at hand. And as they approach this task, as they go after this task, they're given an aim, and that is to build these walls so that God's people can be protected, but also that God's people can be able to worship Him. The temple was built back in the book of Ezra. And now these walls are being built, and they are called to build these walls so that God's people may be protected and so that they might be able to worship the Lord. And so in 5 and 6, we find ourselves wrapping up really the main point of this book in the book of Nehemiah as we head toward these walls being completed. And Nehemiah is giving these people a clear task that's setting before them, and they are to pursue this task, but it's not as straightforward and as easy. All these complications, both externally and internally, are coming upon them, and they're having to deal with these things. And so, the last 4 chapters have shown us that Nehemiah's call to rebuild these walls was being confronted by all these obstacles. This week, we're going to see some more obstacles. It's almost like the Lord knows that last week you had obstacles, and the week before that you had obstacles, and next week, guess what? There's going to be more obstacles. It's almost like in God's Word, He's saying, I want you to understand that these just repetitive obstacles, this idea that we have sometimes that once I get past this, then I can really start like going forward and doing some things and having some prosperity or moving towards some success here. And then you find out that 2 weeks from now, there's a whole other set of obstacles that are there. That's called life. And that's what happens in our lives. That's what we see in Scripture as well. And so here we see, as the last 4 chapters presented obstacles, the next 2 chapters, 5 and 6, are going to also present these same obstacles. And so many of these people that God was using here were actually strangers to one another. And sometimes we don't realize that. They were actually strangers to one another because they had come together from many generations and come together from many different areas and places. And yet they had an identity and they had an aim in common. They were the people of God. That was their common identity. They were supposed to build this wall in this city so that they might worship. That was their common aim. And yet, they were very, very different people. And so with that complexity and with those different generations coming together, guess what? There was friction. There was an instant pot. There was this struggle together to figure out, how do we do this? And how do we accomplish what God's called us to do? So, as we work through our text this morning, I'd like for us to work through chapters 5 and 6. We'll get into a little bit of chapter 7 as well. But we're going to be working through this chapter. And as I go through, I want you to understand what the text is saying. Because at the end of the day, you didn't gather here this morning so that you can hear some practical tips from Shane. You came here this morning to hear the Word of God. And so we're going to be reading through and looking at God's Word together and being able to draw by the power of the Holy Spirit some of these necessary things that are coming from the text. And then my hope is that at the end of, as we read through, then I'll be pointing you to how Christ then can fulfill these things and how we can begin applying these things that are happening in their lives in chapters 5 and 6 to our lives as well. So that's the attempt that we're going to have this morning as we go through. And I want us to notice our text this morning, chapters 5, 6, and the beginning of 7, in 3 points. So here's the 3 points for the sermon. You've already got it, I think, on the bulletin, right? And so that's there. Point number 1, internal contention. Internal contention. That is chapter 5. Point number 2, external opposition. And that's the beginning of chapter 6 there, verses 1 through 14. And then point number 3, final completion. And this is the remainder of chapter 6, starting with verse 15, all the way into chapter 7, verse 4. All right? So I think from what I've heard, I've been given the biggest portion of text. Is that true? So that means I get the longest amount of time. Is that how that works? No? Okay. All right. So let's see if we can do this and be able to walk through this with care. But I am going to rely on you to be able to read this. I would encourage you, even today, this afternoon, take a little bit of time, set aside, and read through 5, 6, and 7, and take the opportunity to reflect on this, because we will not be able to look at every single verse here. All right? So first, let's look at the internal contention that's being revealed here to Nehemiah as we look together at chapter 5. Nehemiah and the people were called to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. But the rest of their life did not stop. It didn't stand still. Instead, they were to be continuing to do all the things that they were responsible to do in their regular lives. They had to eat. They had to go about their lives. They had to do their different things. And added to this, to the everyday circumstances of their life, was this thing that the Lord had called them to, and that is to rebuild these walls. It seemed that the everyday things of life were being pressed out, and the calling that the Lord had given to them began to be overwhelming in their lives. And when this happens in any of our lives, when something new has been handed to us, that the Lord has given to us, and we're already trying to do all the things that are necessary in our lives, there becomes pressure in our lives. And All of the resources that they were used to were beginning to be driven out. And so I want you to notice how they respond. And how they respond is so often how many of us respond at first. And Lord willing, the Lord begins showing us and revealing to us how we're doing this. They respond by simply using and taking advantage of one another so that their resources can continue in their lives. Sadly, they began to even exploit one another and use one another in that way. So I want you to notice as we look together at chapter 5, verse 1, I want you to notice who is being abused here, who is being mistreated as we work through Nehemiah 5. Look with me if you will. Nehemiah 5, verse 1. Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. All right, so the wives are unhappy. That makes everybody unhappy, all right? Nobody's happy at this point. It continues, for there were those who said, with our sons and with our daughters we are many. So let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive. You see what they're doing? They're starving. Their sons and their daughters are starving. There were also those who said, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine. And there were those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, and our children are as their children. Yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters have already been enslaved. But it is not in our power to help it. For other men have our fields and our vineyards. You see the tragedy of what's happening here. There were dire times. Our sons and our daughters are having to be sold into slavery because of the lack of what we have. And God is calling us to do something exceptional and extraordinary. And He's wanting us to pay attention to these things while our children are starving. How can we pay attention to those things that the Lord has called us to when something so urgent and necessary is in front of us? Well, Nehemiah responds. The leader here in verse 6, notice with me, as Nehemiah responds, he says, I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these words. Why was he very angry? He took counsel with himself, and I brought charges against the nobles and the officials and said to them, you are exacting interest, each from his brother. And I held a great assembly against them and said to them, we as far as we are able, have brought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations. In other words, we brought back our people who's been sold to these nations. But you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Verse 9, ought you not to walk in the fear of our God, to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies? These people of God then were redeemed. They were brought back from exile. They had been released from the bondage of their exile and their slavery. And when they get back home to Jerusalem, what was happening? They were enslaving one another. They were placing one another under bondage and under enslavement because of the needs and the pressures of their life. And what Nehemiah here is saying is that this is a shame. This is not good. The nations around us are looking at us and saying, you're doing to your own people what we did to you. And they're taunting them, it says. Their harsh treatment toward one another was due to this very thing. They decided to prefer and want the material things that were around them more than they wanted or preferred to care for and have concern for their brothers and sisters. They began seeing one another as instruments to receive the things that they needed instead of opportunities to serve and love one another well. It's a shame that we see this, but I want you to notice how urgent and necessary it is for us to understand that up to this point, chapters 1 through 4, we've seen a lot of opposition against God's people. But it's been external, hasn't it? It's been on the outside. I want you to be aware of this. The greatest danger that we have as God's church, and the greatest danger that we have this morning, is not from the world that's outside, as astonishing as it is, and as opposed as it is to the things of God. The real danger, where the enemy wants to work this morning, is right here in the midst of us. Right here as internal struggles and sorrows and opportunities to prefer other things than serving and loving one another. Well, what does Nehemiah do? We notice that what Nehemiah does, he addresses this issue of injustice, and the way he does it as a governor, he's actually mentioned here for the first time as the title that he actually is, and that is that he's a governor. He's not telling them, I want you to notice, he doesn't say, you know what, you need to set aside what God's doing and pay attention to these things that you are saying are so urgent. No. Instead, Nehemiah says, instead of setting aside what God's called you to do what God's called you to do, to love and serve one another. And then Nehemiah goes on and says, and I'm also going to step in and sacrifice for this very reason. I'm going to lead and example what needs to happen among all of us. And so notice what Nehemiah does. In Nehemiah 5, verse 14, follow with me. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. Basically, Nehemiah here is saying that he did not take what was allotted to him to eat or to have, as others did in the past. Even their servants lorded it over the people. But he says here, I did not do so. Why? Notice what it says. Because of the fear of God. So you can see now, Nehemiah saw and addressed the oppression of God's people toward one another, but he did not stop the work. But he went on and said, I'm even going to lean in and not receive what is actually allotted to me as food and resources, but instead I'm not even going to take on those, but instead he says, I'm going to give back these things so that you might have them. And why did he do it? It's because he feared the Lord. He feared the Lord. The fear of the Lord was what motivated Nehemiah to not only live in the way he lived, but to also lead in such a way that, if you remember back in verse 9 of chapter 5, why is it that he called them to stop treating one another in such a bad way? It says in verse 9, back earlier in chapter 5, it says, so I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk how? In the fear of our God, to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies. And so we see here Nehemiah leaning in and making sacrifices to love those that are in his community. Now, we would admit that the attacks from the world around us seem substantial, often. We feel the pressure of that more and more as God's people. We would even say at times it's relentless. The good thing is that we're able to regularly gather as God's people. And when we gather as God's people, we set ourselves aside, we come into this room and we sing God's praises and we hear his promises, and it's so glorious. The assaults of the world and everything around us is now set aside, and we're able to come in here and we're able to enjoy one another where we're never sinned against. Or maybe not. We are sinned against. And when we are sinned against by one another that's in this room, those people that are sitting beside you, that are sitting around you, when you're sinned against by those people, you are shocked and surprised. How in the world can they sin against me? I mean, they're supposed to be following Christ. Well, the reason they sin against you is the same reason you sin against them. It's because we're sinners. And if you've been here for very long, if your church is like my congregation and so many other congregations, every other congregation, we know, like the people in Nehemiah's day, we're going to prefer our comforts. We're going to prefer our preferences. We're going to prefer our stuff over leaning in and sacrificing those things for one another. And it requires something from the Lord to keep us from doing those things. It requires a fear of God. It requires a work of God's Spirit among us. And so when we prefer to pursue our comforts instead of lean into the burden of loving, you know and you're thinking to yourself, Shane doesn't realize how messed up some of these people are sitting around me. And how bad they are struggling. And I mean, if I did that, I would do nothing but lean into the work. The Lord's called you here not by accident. The Lord's called you around these people for a reason, because you have been given His Spirit to lean in and love one another, and that will often not be comfortable. It'll cause us to question whether we actually love our things and our stuff and our comforts more than we do one another. Now, here's the difference between the world out there and in here, because there's struggles and difficulties and sorrows in your extended family, maybe even in your own home, at your workplace, at the ballpark when you go and let your kids play at the ballpark, or in the classroom when you go to school. There's tension and strife, and those kinds of things are there. But it's different here among God's people, and this is why. Because the Lord has, by His Spirit, given us the fear of the Lord. And by fearing the Lord, if we're motivated by the fear that the Lord gives us by His Spirit, then we will not, like the world does, be sinned against or be harmed in some way and then just move on. Because isn't that pretty much the normal way that everybody lives? I mean, everybody's sinning at each other all the time. So we just go into each day, know what it is, take our licks, take our bumps, and then move on each and every day, and that's how it works. Not in God's church. Not in God's church. So often, we do not look at our sin and see it for what it really is. You see, there's some here this morning that your regular MO for dealing with sin is that whenever somebody sins against you, you hate conflict. You're not going to deal with it. And so what you do is you say, you know what? It's sin, but the Lord's called me to forgive and forget, right? And so I'm just going to move on, and they didn't really mean it, and you know they're going through a lot, and you make all these, and you know what? We're just gonna move on, and we're gonna act like nothing ever happened. There's some who deal with sin against one another in this congregation like that. Brothers and sisters, you are not taking sin seriously when you do that. Now, there's others in this congregation that are more wired, honestly, like me, and that is, my wife thinks I love conflict, but I don't. I really don't. But I do feel like I need to address conflict. I need to, let's talk it out. Let's get together. And she, oh no, let's not do that, right? And so I want to address conflict. Let's get together. Let's talk it out. Let's figure out what's going on. And there are those here this morning that think that when sin happens, then I need to make sure that that other person understands very clearly how bad they hurt me. And then I'm going to create a list or a strategy of here are all the hoops you need to jump through in order for you to understand how bad you've hurt me. And when you've sufficiently jumped through all of those hoops, then I'm going to forgive you. Because you need to understand how serious sin is, right? Let me tell you, brothers and sisters, that if you are one of those that treat sin that way, you are not treating sin seriously enough. And this is why. Because both of those scenarios, the person that ignores sin and the person that addresses sin and tries to make the scenario and say, you need to understand how bad this is, both of those scenarios thinks that the greatest hindrance, the greatest harm, the greatest vile rebellion in the sin, the sinfulness of the sin is how that sin makes me feel. Instead of, we need to understand that the greatest sinfulness in sin is how that sin makes God feel. What is that sin like before the Lord? And when we begin to understand that sin, according to the Baptist Catechism, says, what is sin? Answer, sin is any lack of conformity unto or transgression of your law. It doesn't say that. Not your law. It says sin is any lack of conformity unto or transgression of the law of God. In order for sin to be dealt with, we can neither ignore it nor hammer the person who sins against us as God's people. Because if we do that, that's exactly what the world does. And you're acting like you do not have the gospel, brothers and sisters. But you do. All of us have acted this way. All of us have been treated this way. But as Christians, I want you to know that all of you in here are going to sin against one another. That should not surprise you. Now, you should not dismiss it, nor should you hammer everybody that ever says or does something against you or wrongs you in some way. This internal contention that was in God's people in chapter 5 is pretty serious, isn't it? It's pretty significant. It's not something that we can just kind of deal with and then move on from. It's something we have to deal with, and it's something that we're going to be dealing with for the rest of our time as a congregation. So how do we do that? When we realize that our sin is first and foremost against God, and that the real sinfulness of sin, the real rebellion and vileness of our sin, is that we have violated a good and loving and gracious God. We have rebelled against Him. And this fear that the Lord stirs in us, that we've rebelled against Him, allows us as God's people to do this. It allows me to go to my brother or sister and say, I've sinned against you. Will you go to the cross with me? Will you go with me to the cross? And when we go to the cross and we lay the penalty and the wrath that sin deserved, when we bring it there where Jesus says, when I died on that cross, I received the penalty and payment of all sin and suffering of sin for all of those who will believe in me. When we go to the cross and we bring our sin there, you're able to confess that sin and then walk away from the cross forgiven. Because Christ has bore that sin on your behalf. And both of you aren't holding things against each other anymore, or just remembering, forgiving, and forgetting, or constantly beating each other up about your sin. You're able to lay it there at the cross and say, it has been paid for, because the one who was hindered by my sin has paid the price for it. May the Lord help us see that our internal contentions must be dealt with, and the only way they can be dealt with is when we take each other to the cross. When we bring each other to the very cross of Christ and say, here is where my sin dies. And the guilt and penalty for it has been paid. And we can leave one another. We can leave the cross with one another, loving one another well and faithfully. Let's turn now to chapter 6, the external opposition. We have the internal contention, but now point number 2, chapter 6, the external opposition that Nehemiah and God's people were facing. Now, we've seen this opposition over and over again, and we've seen it earlier in the book, in the last several chapters. Here, however, it's unique, and this is why. Because the enemy, those who are against Nehemiah and the wall being built, they realize they have a last-ditch effort to do everything they can to make this stop. If they don't make it cease right now, it'll end up being completed. And so the enemy, to what God's trying to do here, they realize this thing's coming together and the wall is getting ready to be built. We've got to do everything we can, pull all the stops, take everything, all of our weapons, and lodge them toward them, because if we do not stop the wall here, it's going to be built. And so they're pulling everything out, and they're doing their best to try to turn them away from, hinder them or distract them from doing what God's called them to do. Now, I want you to notice the opposition, and I want you to notice how regular and how common this opposition is when the Lord has given not only these people during the time of Nehemiah 6 a task to do, but each and every one of us have the same kind of opposition when the Lord's given us a task. Look with me at chapter 6, verse 1. Now, when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, any of you that are pregnant, I'd love for you to name your children. Not this. Do not name your children this. A lot of times when we're reading, especially Old Testament books, and Nehemiah here, you hear these big names, and it kind of makes us fuzzy and causes us not to stay focused. Don't lose yourself for these big names. Keep moving through. Know that these are simply those who are opposing Nehemiah, but these names can easily distract us and keep us from understanding what's going on. So notice this. Now, when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, the Arab, and the rest of our enemies, so they're along with others, heard that I had built the wall and that there was no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set up the doors and the gate. So it was almost finished. Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, "Come and let us meet together at Hekapharim in the plain of Ono." All right, so that's basically a city, and most think that this city was about 3 or 4 hours away from where they were working. And they wanted Nehemiah to come. And so notice what it says. But they intended to do me harm, is what Nehemiah said. They intended to do me harm. We don't know exactly how Nehemiah knew that, other than it was these guys were typical enemies, but also that the Lord might have very well given him some indication that their desire was simply to pull him away, and they were seeking to do him harm in that way. And it goes on and says, "I sent messengers to them, saying, I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them the same manner. In the same way, Sanballat, for the 5th time, sent his servant to me with an open letter in his hand. So I want you to notice here, these guys they sent 4 times and said, "Nehemiah, we want you to come and come away from the work. We've got some things we want to talk to you about." And what are they trying to do? They're trying to get him to stop, to be distracted, to delay the work. And we find out later that they're actually trying to kill Nehemiah. Once they kill the leader, then they know that this will fall apart. And so they send the 5th time, Sanballat, with this letter. And listen to what the letter says. In it was written, "It is reported among the nations," and Geshem also says it, "that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That is why you are building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. And you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, there is a king in Judah. And now the king will hear of these reports." You see what he's doing? He's saying, not only have we heard these things, but we're going to report it back to the king. And so now come and let us take counsel together. And so he's saying, to keep this from happening, we're trying to take care of you. We're trying to help you out. These reports are being said, and they're amazing, and there's this harshness. They're saying you're wanting to rebel, and that you're intending to make yourself king, and that you're wanting to take over here. Come and talk to us about it. You see what they're doing? Notice what it goes on and says. Then I sent to him, saying, "No such things as you say have been done." You see what he's saying? He's saying, this is ridiculous. Nothing like that has been done. For you are inventing them out of your own mind. Let me ask you, do we live in a day today where there's things that are coming out of nowhere, and you think about it and you're like, this is insane. They're like flat out making up stuff and delivering them to us as if they're true. Is that the world we live in today? Same as this day. For it goes on, it says they're inventing them out of their own mind, for they all wanted to do this, to frighten us. They're wanting to create fear in us. Their hands, notice, their hands will drop from the work and it will not be done. That's what they're wanting. And now notice this last phrase here. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. Do you hear that prayer right there at the end? The wall is being completed, and the opposition is becoming ferocious. They're desperate now to stop the work. And what is the thing that they think is most advantageous to cause the work of God to stop? Listen to me. There is one tool in the toolbox of our enemy Satan, and it is this: a lie. It is deception. It is to speak something that is fantastic and untrue, and in so doing, it will frighten God's people and keep them from doing the work that God has called them to do. And here we see the very same thing. Satan's lies, who is himself the father of lies, when we live in this world and we're constantly bombarded by the news and the media and all the things that are around us, telling us that if we live faithfully for the Lord and do what God's called us to do, you're going to be in trouble. Did you hear the news? They're saying these things about you guys. And they're going to do this. And why don't we come and talk to us and let us discuss whether you should be faithful to Christ in your community and in your workplace and in your church. You and I both know that if we go talk to them, that's not going to end well for God's gospel and the gospel of Christ, right? And so they're wanting to distract us, turn us away from the faith. The world and its lies are wanting to cause fear to come into our hearts and cause us to taper back, to throttle our faithfulness and our carefulness to the Lord. This is where I love the book of Nehemiah, specifically because of the prayers of Nehemiah. Notice how short this prayer is. Some of you are fantastic at praying really long prayers, and you might even be asked to come up here and pray. But all of us know that some of our shortest prayers have been the ones that are most earnest. You've been sitting beside your bed, the loved one that is in incredible sorrow or going in a wrong direction, and your prayer has been, help, Lord. I don't know what to do, Lord. I don't know how to step in. I don't know where to go. Help, Lord. Do something, because I've done everything I can do. This is a very short prayer of Nehemiah. And it's just as desperate. Fear is beginning to set in among God's people. They're hearing these lies, and Nehemiah's prayer is, but now, O God, strengthen my hands. Make me faithful to the calling, Lord. Do not let me waver or be distracted. Keep me to the calling. We will get distracted from the work that the Lord has called us to. Brothers and sisters, you will be distracted in encouraging and supporting and loving one another well because of the lies of the world saying that you can actually find more satisfaction, more solace, more comfort, and more approval from the world out there than you can from encouraging one another in Christ here in this body of believers. And you're going to be giving your life to all kinds of other things out there. Why? Because you're believing their lie, instead of choosing to love and to serve one another faithfully here where He's called you. Beyond that, the enemy is seeking to distract many of you from the very callings that He's given to you. There are some here this morning that are truck drivers. There are others that are accountants. Maybe others that are students in a local college or seminary or somewhere around. Others have the calling to teach, maybe a classroom or maybe in the home. There are those who are called to love their elderly parents. There are others here this morning that have been given the exceptional and glorious calling, and I don't say this lightly, has been given the exceptional and glorious calling of wiping noses and picking up Cheerios off the kitchen floor. Amen. And the enemy out there wants to distract and delay you from doing what God's called you to do. Each of you in your callings that the Lord has given to you, there is an enemy out there that's seeking to call you away from the callings, and the way he is doing that is by lying to you, giving your thoughts and your souls thoughts that are not true. They're being made up out of nowhere, and you're beginning to believe them. You're thinking to yourself, this is so mundane, there's no way it can be important. That's a lie. You may be thinking to yourself, I'll never get a raise. I'm stuck in this job, and I'm never going to succeed, and I'll never be able to make any more money than I'm making right now. That's a lie. Some of you are thinking to yourself, or you thought to yourself, the only one that cares about my mom and dad, and the only one that knows anything about my mom and dad is me. And I'm all by myself. There are some of you that are here this morning that have heard in your head, I'm all alone because God wants me to be. And I'm here to tell you that that's a lie from the enemy. These lies come at us from many directions, and I fear that too many of us are willing to believe them so quickly. We forget the promises of God, and we actually believe that device that we look at every day, or the things that are being said by people around us. You know that world that that friend of yours lives in that you keep seeing and it's so fantastic and wonderful? That's not true. That's not true. They're making it up, just like was being said here in this passage. These are lies from the enemy that's seeking to keep you from doing what God's called you to do, that may be just everyday, ordinary tasks, but they are glorious, God-given callings. Know this. None of these things that are lodged in your heart and your mind that are seeking to distract you from what God's called you to do, none of these things are true. These are invented out of the mind of the enemy of God, and they are against his children. Don't get distracted or discouraged. You are doing a great work. Why should you leave it? Why should you leave it, as Nehemiah said? Do not come down off of this calling. Keep at it and be faithful in it. Know that God has given you this calling and he's going to strengthen you for it. Find value and worth in the fact that the Lord has given you this. Don't get distracted or discouraged by the made-up fascinations or imaginations that are the lies that are constantly being presented to you by the world, saying that your life could be much more valuable and important if you're doing something else. If the Lord has given you this task and this calling, then I hope and I pray that your prayer is this. But now, O God, strengthen my hands for this calling that I've been given to by you. What ways is the world around you seeking to delay or distract you from doing what God's called you to do? In what ways is the Lord seeking to build and encourage your life? Ways that he's producing repentance and faith in you that you don't even see because you're so distracted by the things that the world is saying around you. We're called to so fulfill our vocations that we are able to then keep at the heart of our vocations, at the heart of our callings, the very focus of the gospel, knowing that that's what the Lord's ultimately doing in our lives. So let's look lastly at the end of chapter 6, verse 15. Notice with me, chapter 6, verse 15. Now this is what all of the preachers up to this point that's been preaching from Nehemiah, how many of y'all had? 5 or 6, 4, 5? All of these guys wanted this passage, and they gave it to me because they love me so much. So I'm so glad. Look, this is what everybody's after right here. Verse 15 in chapter 6, it said this. So the wall was finished. Do you see that? And then in verse 16, notice it says, and when all our enemies heard of it, that is the wall being finished, and all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem. Notice this last line of verse 16. For they, this is why they were afraid, they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. Do you remember that vacation we talked about at the beginning of the sermon? If the only aim that I had in the vacation was to get my family out of town, hang out together for a little while, and then get back into town alive and well, then I accomplished the aim, right? However, vacations really are more than just that, aren't they? And my plea to you this morning is that God was doing more than simply trying to finish a wall with these people. The wall was definitely needed, but it was a means to an end. What the Lord was ultimately doing was far greater than just to build a wall, far more substantial. Indeed, for sure, the Lord had given them a job, a task, a calling to physically restore and reconstruct this wall. But what the Lord was ultimately trying to do is bring spiritual restoration to their souls. He was calling them in the midst of this task of building a wall. He was building their faith. And he was bringing them to the end of themselves and helping them realize the sin that was there. And he was saying, look, what I can provide for you is better than all that you think you need. What's the Lord doing in your life? I guarantee you that the Lord is doing more than just allowing you to keep the kids alive this week. The Lord is doing more in your life than simply giving you a paycheck to pay the bills. The Lord is doing more by gathering us here on Lord's Day every Sunday than just getting some coffee, hanging out with a few people, and then getting home sometime as close to noon as possible. I don't think you're going to get home by noon today, by the way. What the Lord's trying to do is restore us and reconcile us, show us our sin, and to bring us to the cross. And when people look at your lives, will they look at what God's doing in your life and say, what's happening there isn't just a mama taking care of kids, isn't just a man keeping a job going, isn't just paychecks coming in, but God's at work there. And there's something more going on there than anything this world could give them. There's more being accomplished. There's more that's being finished. Why? Because of the declaration of our Savior. You remember one of the last words he spoke? It is finished. If you're here this morning and you've never placed your faith in Christ, I would call you to do so. Turn from the rat race and the frantic life of trying to live according to your own plan and standard, and say, Lord, could it be that you're wanting actually more for me than I've ever dreamed? All of us have all kinds of dreams. How many older people in here, I'd love for you to talk to some of the older people in here and say, is your life exactly the way you thought it was going to be when you left high school? And man, it's different. And harder. And better. Because the Lord's in it. My prayer for all of you in this congregation is that there will be a day years from now when people are going to look back at Grace Fellowship and they're going to say, it wasn't just a bunch of people meeting in this building on this corner in this area of town. But God was at work there. God was doing something there. And my prayer is that all of us, when we reach our final days, and all of us will, that when we get to our final days and we know that our weeks are coming to a close, we're going to look back on our lives. And it won't be the paychecks. And it won't be the manicured yard. And it won't be all of these things that so often we just let our lives become so frustrated and discouraged and disoriented by. It's going to be the things that God has done. It's going to be how God has worked in our lives to bring about faith and repentance and to restore us and to reconcile us and to help us learn to love one another and love our Savior as we ought. Why? Because Christ said not just that a wall was finished, but that He has finished that work for us. Trust Him. And your prayer can be like Psalm 126. Psalm 126, verses 1 through 3 says this. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouths were filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are glad. Let us pray. Father in heaven, come by your grace and do great things in the midst of this congregation. May we, like the people in Nehemiah's day, realize that you are at work in our midst and that you are seeking to do things among us that is far more than so often what we expect. Oh, that we would not fear or tremble, but instead, with great joy and with great exaltation, say that you have done great things for us. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.